Hi, my name is Doug Botkin. I'm a Technology and Market Development Manager for Accugenix.
Hi, I'm Duncan Barlow. I'm Technology and Market Development Manager for Accugenix in Europe.
Automation is usually associated with equipment. What is the role of automation in tracking and trending and environmental monitoring as a whole?
Doug, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a good question because when I think of automation, the first thing that comes to my mind is bringing in a robot, bringing in pieces of equipment to offload these, menial tasks in the laboratory. When talking about automation with a service, one of the goals of automation in general is to increase operational efficiencies, increase data integrity. I think outsourcing does that a lot of times. Is you offload these tasks from your personnel in your lab, allowing them to focus on other tasks. I was in the microbiology lab. There was always something to do, always something else to do. The last thing you want to have is your analysts bogged down with tasks that can be offloaded to labs that do this literally for a living.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Doug, because yeah, you're right. When people say automation, they think of machines and robots to simplify tasks, but I view outsourcing as kind of being an ultimate automation, because when you have a robot or a machine in your lab, you still have to have someone who's trained on how to set that machine up, troubleshoot, maybe even some maintenance. Whereas with outsourcing, you can find a partner who's an absolute expert in that field, and then all you have to do is worry about shipping your samples to them and then analyzing the results when they come back. So for me, yeah, it kind of is a funny fit for automation, but it's almost like ultimate automation. You're just removing the need for analysis in your lab altogether to try and simplify things for your own lab.
Right. Yeah, true. I think you can get better results a lot of times too, because depending on how many times a lab IDs things, you're not doing this something that you don't do very often, you're not likely to be as good at it. And so it's important to, like saying, automate. Also, the ultimate automation is sending your samples out to labs that do this day in and day out. It's important to use validated systems too. I mean, these labs do use validated systems. It's hard to maintain a quality system for an identification strategy in the lab as well. So it saves a lot of time if you're able to outsource.
Yeah, exactly. And the question also asked about automation of tracking and trending, and that's something that from my experience of people speaking with people who run ID programs, the new Annex 1 has quite a heavy focus on trending now.
Mm-hmm.
Mentioned there multiple times, when the previous version it wasn't mentioned at all. So there's a huge expectation to do trending. I think most people do some form of trending, but from my experience, we see a lot of people still using pretty manual techniques to trend the data that's generated. So we were at a seminar recently and we asked the question how people are trending their data, and Excel spreadsheets came out as being sort of probably the most commonly used technique, which, as I'm sure there's potentially issues with using spreadsheets when you're managing data.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. And I'm guilty of the same thing. In my past experiences, I've used commercial LIMS systems, and I've also used Excel, because a lot of times, Excel it's not fit for use for tracking and trending. That's not what Microsoft intended it being used for. It's useful for managing, data sets. As far as it's hard to validate Excel, I know some groups do it, but it's hard to validate that sheet for tracking and trending. And there's not functions built in to allow you to really track and trend your data. Like you're saying, it's a very manual process, and it's prone to errors. And it is honestly probably one of the most commonly used software packages for tracking and trending. So and that's what you get, with Accugenix, the customer web portal. You get the capability to track and trend your data all in one spot. That's validated. It's validated. It's compliant with CFR. I think that's a huge advantage, and it fills a potential data integrity gap in the organization as well. When you can use these commercial software that are already validated, you don't have to do that in-house. You don't have to worry about validating spreadsheets, validating these workflows. that are prone to, data errors as well.
Yeah, I think certainly from my experience, I've seen, a lot of microorganisms have quite complex names, and when you're transcribing that into a spreadsheet, it's
Yeah.
very easy to just put a simple typing error in there, or just a slight misunderstanding or slight misreading of the word that your ID system's given you. I've seen examples where just one letter has been missed, so it says bacterium rather than bacterium, for example, at the end of the name. And of course, if you enter it correctly one time and then incorrectly another time, you've split. And then how do you trend that when you've split the data for that microorganism? I'm a bit of a geeky nerd when it comes to this stuff. There's a website all about the use of spreadsheets and the risk of using spreadsheets. And I discovered in there that there's studies being done, not just in pharma, on spreadsheets in general. And it's estimated that around 94% of all spreadsheets have at least one error in them somewhere. And you think, that seems like a huge number, but there's a lot of analysis gone behind it.
Right.
But there's examples from the real world as well, outside of pharma, of where spreadsheets have caused major issues. I live just near Edinburgh, and they were building a new hospital here, and there was a lot of data stored in spreadsheet format about their air handling and airflow systems. And the way the data was stored in the spreadsheet meant there was errors in it. So when the hospital was built, they discovered that the air handling system was incorrect for the requirements of the hospital because of the way it had been stored in the spreadsheet, and it cost a huge amount of money to fix. So simple mistakes in spreadsheets can lead to huge issues with especially things like tracking and trending.
Yeah, no, that's a really good example, because an organization has to also think about how many errors are they willing to tolerate in the spreadsheet, in tracking and trending. Like you mentioned, Annex 1, and tracking and trending has always been important. Annex 1 is putting a little bit more emphasis on it right now. But what impact do those errors have on, if your tracking and trending is wrong? Do you miss a trend? Do you miss an adverse trend? Are you missing certain organisms? If you have target organisms, potentially vegetable organisms, and you misspell it, then you miss that organism. What is your risk? Your risk to your in process, your risk to your final product, your risk to patients, your risk to your business. So that's a good point, is that, there's no real good error checking in Excel. It's, you put it in there and the transcription errors are a very real problem, and there's no way to really fix that. It's all human based. It comes back to removing the human as much as possible from a lot of these processes. And with outsourcing and these automated tracking and trending suites, I think that does that a lot of times. People are error prone. I mean, that's everyone knows that, and so automation addresses that issue and increases data integrity.
I think that answers that nicely.